All right, we're a minute over, so I guess it's time to start. I will be in the background doing Q&A at the end. I'm Courtney LeBlanc. I'm the channel account manager covering the Central region. Very excited to have Optiv here today with our CEO, Snehal. I'll let Brandon and Snehal introduce themselves, but we will answer questions at the end of this fireside chat. Thank you so much for participating today, Brandon and Snehal.
Thank you, Courtney. Brandon, welcome, man. Love to hear all about you, your background. We'll get you excited, and then I'll let you take the steering wheel and run the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Snehal. So I'm Brandon Duclos with Optiv Security. So I cover the central and commercial region with us on this side of things. So bunch of my background just at a really high level to kind of save some people some time. Started out DoD side of things early on in career with USSOCOM, built that up through Big Four, and now over here at Optiv running our commercial segment and looking forward to really kickstarting this partnership with Horizon 3 and kind of what we're going to do from our traditional pen testing side of it and where we're really trying to take that next step to help customers with a really cost-effective solution where we're looking to merge both sides of the conversation, where we're leveraging the NodeZero platform to offer a cost-effective solution and tiering that with our 300 plus pen testing consultants that do this all day long within Fortune 500 companies, all the way down to our smaller commercial size businesses to really go out there and grow that piece together. I know Snehal does a great job talking about kind of what we can see from the NodeZero platform, and you've had a lot of experience on your side from that automation piece and what you see day to day. I want to know that we're able to pull about 10,000 vulnerabilities a year on our side with the manual pen testing. What do you kind of see on your side of it with the automated side?
It's a good question. So we'll jump right into it, and then I definitely want to talk about some of our shared experiences, just because purpose, impact, mission, as part of your character, kind of drives a lot of how you operate, and I think there's some cool synergies there. But for starters, when I was a CIO, the hardest part of my job, one of the hard parts of the job, was deciding what not to fix. And we would get 100,000 vulnerabilities in a spreadsheet. Maybe 10 or 20 were actually meaningful. And even then, to exploit, you'd have to have physical access to the data center, thumb drive in the back of a server, standing on one foot, twirling a pizza, like some obtuse conditions to go off and exploit. And I always had this frustration that being vulnerable didn't mean I was exploitable. And what I needed to focus on was exploitability of my environment first and foremost. And the only way to prove exploitability was to actually attack, to actually look at your environment through the eyes of the attacker. And at the time, and I think there's still roughly only about 5,000 certified ethical hackers or pen testers in the United States, and about 20 to 25,000 globally. So there's just not enough supply of highly skilled pen testers to go off and help prove exploitability, not just once a year, but as often as your environment changes. And so we needed some form of force multiplier, which really became the starting point for thinking about NodeZero and Horizon 3 and starting this company 5 years ago now. So, when you think about the 300 folks you have at Optiv, you guys have built out this highly skilled cadre of people, but they're really hard to hire. They're really hard to retain. And so imagine all these other mediocre firms that are out there that can't bring in talent. What do? They gift wrap vulnerability scans with a little bit of Nmap, a little bit of Metasploit, calling that a pen test. So the side effect now is you have this insane long tail of mediocre consulting firms polluting the entire pen testing space. And so I guess the challenge for us is, how do we comprehensively test an environment, understanding where you're exploitable without sacrificing quality or giving a false sense of security and confidence. And I think that's where teaming up with Optiv becomes quite powerful for your customers and for ours.
I agree too, and that's something that we see as well. I mean, every year you have those different compliance waves that'll come in, whether it's coming for a PCI pen test or, hey, we need to go and do something because our part cybersecurity insurance now requires a pen test for artists to be compliant, to keep getting insurance so they can stay in business. That's the same thing we run into, and one of the reasons that we're leaning into NodeZero is to be able to take that 300 and multiply it out and say, okay, you're going to let this run in the background, specifically really for these commercial and SMB clients that I believe are misserved today. really go in and hit them to be able to offer them something that's one, not only cost effective, but then come back and say, hey, do you want to come back and rescan this, like you mentioned again, a second time, a third time? Do you want to do this continuously so that we can really take that and help them out, especially in those smaller teams where they don't have the staff to handle it? And that allows us to take that and augment it with a actual consultant that's done this day to day, allow them to continue doing their main pen test work that they're doing within their larger customers, come in, carve off 2 or 3 days of that week while they're doing the rest of their other daily job and say, okay, SMB commercial customer, here's what we're going to do to take this and really help you take that next step in your security journey to really build upon that so that one, to your point earlier, it's not 10,000 vulnerabilities anymore. We narrowed it down to your 10 big servers that you need to go hit right now that are going to have the biggest impact. Now we're also helping you with return on investment as well too. Like, hey, do we need to go upgrade these servers? Do we need to go patch this? Do we need to do an infrastructure assessment because that one's a little bit long in the tooth now? This really helps them to mature and grow that investment and also grow some stake at the table as well for them too, to really express over to their leadership what they're doing, how they're addressing those problems proactively. Because we've both been them reactively within our career. I'm 20 plus years in the industry now, been through my fair share of incidents. We've all seen what those look like. They're not a fun one to wake up to at 2:30 in the morning and then work on for the next 48 hours just trying to come up with your run plan. To be able to see those pieces proactively and then to be able to tie them back to something that we can show off at an executive level presence to really say, okay, you did the pen test, you're doing that, that's great. What do we do next? How do we build that proactive mindset into it? Do we do a full on red team? Do we move to a purple team type scenario? Those are all things we look to go out and build upon. I think those are really some of the big joint pieces that I'm looking forward to getting kicked off. I know what we're doing too from that managed side of it with some of the larger customers. I really like to see that piece of it and what we've grown into. And I know we share a lot of similarity in some of our background as well too. We've seen some of that piece. What questions would you kind of ask of some of those customers out there where you can see if we have that joint ability to go out there and attack and help people out?
I think so. It's a good question. If you, from what I've seen across our customer base, as well as my own personal experience, the once you actually understand where you're exploitable, the hard problem is actually the capacity to fix. It's remediation capacity that's the true bottleneck in this whole process. And oftentimes it's because the senior IT admin, the senior network engineer, or the actual people with the expertise to fix, they're already overworked. They're carrying the bulk of the organization on their shoulders. They're a little bit numb to security in the sense that, oh, come on, you expect me to skip another basketball game, my kid's basketball game, to stay back and patch servers? Why is it different this time? Because I knew the last time there was a bunch of noise. And so you're already trying to overcome this skepticism from the fixers. They're already overtasked and overworked. And so how do you increase your remediation capacity? And for me, step one is prioritization and focus. Make sure every calorie of remediation is spent on, or every ounce of effort is spent on the things that truly matter, kind of number one. And number two, this is where automation becomes really important. And I think that MCP servers in the world of AI become a game changer because I was involved in SOAR when I was at Splunk and I was a CTO there. And the challenge with SOAR products and platforms is they were basically glorified Python frameworks, and you had to bring all your content. Well, most of those folks aren't going to be able to bring all their content. It's really hard to build production safe source scripts, and that's a full-time job as a blended software engineer IT admin. And so I think that autonomous pen testing, which is finding issues that matter, paired with MCP servers, which are effectively natural language or GenAI interfaces into workflow automation. So you don't have to be super precise in your APIs anymore. You can describe what you want done, and the MCP server is going to be able to work with you through Cloud Desktop or VS Code or whatever to help figure it out. I think there's this entirely new era of SOAR automated remediation that brings the power and expertise of, say, an Optiv with the power and expertise of NodeZero. And I think it's that combination that will execute the find, fix, verify loop that I talk about often that becomes really powerful. And so I think that NodeZero alleviates the bottleneck of pen testing at scale. It also helps you to fiercely prioritize problems that truly matter. And then you've got this human expertise, which is required to do the actual remediation. And I think it's that combination that's going to transform the security posture of our customers.
I 100% agree. I think the prioritization piece is that real key word that I picked up on that side. It's being able to prioritize what to go out there and get remediated so you don't have to worry about that problem anymore and really being able to dive into it. And that's something that we offer on every one of our pen test services. And we give it as a line item for the customer to be able to come back and choose and solution off of that piece. It's like, hey, here's everything that we've got that we determined from the scans, that we've determined from our testing analysis. Here's everything that we recommend you go hit. And our next question is always, where would you like us to help? And where do you want to take it back with your team? And to your point, a lot of those customers are coming back to us and saying, hey, we don't really have a patching tool, or maybe we do something that's on the back end. We leverage Microsoft, we leverage Jamf, we leverage something, a tool to be able to go out there and help out with some of the patching side of it. But it's where can you take that as a next step? Because to your point, the human element, I've clicked buttons and walked away for a night before and watched that blow up on me in a couple of hours. So knowing that there's somebody there to manage that task for you, to really be able to take it and show what that looks like and what good looks like, I think is the best part to really take that step forward and really helping that customer. To the earlier point that I made, let's help build that security framework out. Let's help build this up into something that they're able to take back and take that workload off of them as much as we possibly can so that they're able to go home at night and enjoy that family time, enjoy that football game, enjoy that basketball game, to really go out and grow it.
Yeah, and I think that there's a window of time in between finding and fixing that's also super important. So there are some remediations that simply take time for a variety of reasons. You can't patch that server until your maintenance window, which might be 60 days away. And there are very legitimate business reasons for why that maintenance window exists. Or this just really hard. You've got to completely change authentication flows for a JMX service because of the importance of changing, JMX authentication because we exploited it in some way. And so what do you do in that window of time? And this is where we launched a capability called tripwires, NodeZero tripwires. And the whole idea was I'm a big believer in deception, and I'm a big skeptic of deception. And the reason why is um, most organizations can barely secure themselves, let alone spin up a lifelike honeypot or deception set of services in their network. And so I think that it's incredibly powerful when done right to get attackers to self-identify because they've tripped over some sort of honey token or some sort of deceptive service. But at the same time, the hardest part is actually getting those services up and running because you've got to spend a lot of time understanding your network. So one of the things that we've added to the product now is while running a pen test, NodeZero will auto deploy fake AWS credentials, fake Azure tokens, fake SQL dump files, and so on into the network onto the hosts and data shares that we gained access to. And the reason why that's super interesting is now suddenly pen test results are the map and compass for where to actually drop deceptive capabilities. And if you think about back on the Optiv side, being able to bundle incident response retainers, being able to test incident response processes by triggering these tripwires as part of your, train like you fight kind of mantra and experience becomes a great way to prove cyber readiness. And now you're no longer just compliant, which is a point in time check the box. You're proving readiness because you're quickly fixing problems that matter and you are building muscle memory for incident response for those issues that take just much longer to go off and remediate. What do you think? How does that align with the way you think about the world?
That aligns very much with kind of my views on it too. And I think you brought up a key point too with the incident response retainers, because that's something that we utilize all day long, every day. And that's something that we even offer low cost entry pieces on too, just because we know how much of a blessing it is to know you have a bat line to call at the end of the day when something does go wrong. And it's also something that, to your point, like we're not a user lose type shop. We're hey, you didn't use it? Great. Let's roll that over into something else to continue on that growth. And after a year, we can go ahead and roll it up to the next piece of it. Do you want to come in and do a red team? Do you want to see how you actually respond if we're being quiet inside the network and trying to poke around without being loud and blatant that we're doing it, right? So that allows us to really take that to the next level. And it also allows for that training piece, because the train as you fight's a good mantra, right? Well, that allows us to come in and say, hey, did your team pick up that the red team was in there? We leveraged that IR that we didn't have to touch last year. Were they able to pick that up? If they weren't, let's take that as now, let's move it to blue team. How do we help that in the future so that when someone's poking around the network, we're able to see it? How do we tie those tripwire piece from NodeZero to make sure that you were able to be alerted to it? What happened so that you weren't in the first place? So it's a lot of that. Let's make sure we're getting the alerts to the right people. Let's make sure they're getting them to the right systems. Let's make sure that it's visible. I think visibility becomes that key point, and making sure that everybody on the team knows where to go look. Everybody on the team knows who their next point of contact is, whether it be from a notification perspective. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a run book that has a key and a safe to go unlock someplace. Let's make those more common knowledge, like what we're doing and what I've seen kind of the evolution of security awareness training become, where we're not testing in October because it's cybersecurity awareness month. We're doing it every month, and really bringing that test out, really pushing that employee base, those users to that next level of, hey, security is a journey for everybody, not just the 5 people that work on the security team trying to do everything. So I think that that's a really big one to really grow off of. And I think that's also where we move into some of those outsourcing analyses as well, too. I've been parts of teams where I've been the outsource. I've been parts of teams where I was the one hands on keyboard doing it. I think having that extra step to where you're able to really know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then go and adapt to those and really get those pieces to kind of help out and grow that scenario.
I used to joke with my teams back in the CIO days, the best time to hack a company is in September because it's been 11 months since that company cared about security. And that's
100%.
what's that's what's key is like it's not an annual thing or a monthly thing. There's another part here, which is, you know, your customers and many companies we work with have spent millions of dollars on SOC tools. They've trusted your advice to buy an EDR you recommend or a PAM solution you recommend and so on as Optiv as a whole. And these are all great products, but it's really easy to um, implement them in a slightly wrong way or misconfigure them in some way or so on. And suddenly you think you've got protection from that EDR, but you forgot to prevent OS credential dumping as an advanced feature. And then you only learn the hard way in the middle of a hack. And so another area that becomes really interesting is using us to prove the effectiveness of your security controls, your endpoint controls, your data controls, your identity controls. And, on the one hand, that can be used to help almost like customer success, your existing, customers. Hey, you've used us. Let's go make, or you've implemented a bunch of products or you purchased a bunch of products through Optiv. How do we go off and make sure that you're actually implementing them correctly? And let's make sure you're getting the most value. And the other side is, hey, your defense in depth is missing a few controls. Here are the things that we recommend you implement, or here are some products you actually don't really need. You could probably get rid of. So you end up in tools rationalization as well. Talk a bit about your experience in verifying the effectiveness of security controls and how, with autonomous pen testing, your customer base and the market writ large has a way to actually prove or justify the money they're spending on tools.
100%. So I think one big thing that we do a little bit differently on the Optiv side is we have something called the Optiv Promise. That's any technology that you buy from us that we made a recommendation on after we went through, whether it be proof of concept or anything that we've gone through with the customer base. We make sure that at least on a quarterly basis, we're coming back and checking on how that tool is doing. Right. So that's what allows our workforce from that sales side of it, from my SA team personally, to go out there and make sure that that tool that we sold is completely backed by us. We helped out with the install process, but we're not walking away from it. At the end of the day, our goal is for our customers to be secure. And that's just a knock on our brand to make sure that we're doing the right thing for our customers out there. I think where the autonomous pen test piece comes in and where it's really beneficial is it allows us to augment that to where we're not just making it now a monthly or a quarterly thing. It allows us to be continuous, to be able to go out and say, hey, let's come back and take a look at how that's actually going to affect something when we have an autonomous scan that's running in the environment, acting as that bad guy, to really come and improve that nothing's changed. Because to your point, we're all human at the end of the day. And if we're coming back and checking it a month later after it was installed, I fat fingered things in my early career, right? And made a change that got pushed out to everything. I think everybody that has done it at some point as you're learning and as your early experience, that's how you get here 20 years later. You learn from your experiences and you move on with it from those early days where a senior said, hey, go click this button, and you trusted that the button was the correct one to push. So then you find out about it after the fact, and you're really having to go back in there and adjust and make those pieces to it. I think that that's where NodeZero really comes into play a part, and why we're looking at integrating it in with our advanced fusion center customers, why we're looking at integrating it with our managed customers under the MDR side of it, to be able to not only one prove that the solution is out there integrated properly, but it's also a test to make sure that we're following through because we're not seeing every little change too, especially in a lower managed account. The customer's running that day-to-day environment. We're just getting the alerts back. With NodeZero, we're able to get an alert back that we know is real. And now we're able to go and spend way less time in a SOC trying to take a day to analyze it and make sure it's not a false positive to, we know we have something real, let's go act on it right now. And that's one big benefit that I see is increasing that touch point, increasing that security, and also building up both brands together as well too, of showing that what we're doing proactively for our customer base.
Yeah, that's actually pretty amazing. I didn't realize you guys do that, the Optiv Promise. That's a huge um, uh, brand win. That's a pretty amazing promise as well, and was something we should catch up more on because it's a great way to let your results do the talking in that promise. Um, I'd love to shift gears a little bit. You know, you and I have this common experience we learned about right before this call of taking time to serve as civilians within the special operations community. And we kind of bookended that time and said, you know, you mentioned you were there in 2004. I joined in 2018 and left at the end of 21. Now maybe I'll kind of start with and lead you to love your thoughts on this. I was a tourist in special operations, right? My military experience was watching Jack Ryan and Tropic Thunder. And I wasn't a shooter. I didn't come from a military family, but I had this unique opportunity to leave Silicon Valley and go serve as the first chief technology officer at JSOC. And it was the hardest and most meaningful work of my career. And I learned more and grew more as a leader than in anything else I'd ever done. And what I realized is that uh, a few things. The first was just kind of the people themselves. What made folks in special operations special is not that they could run fast, shoot well, or swim far. It's that they are learn-it-alls that can solve any problem as a team under pressure. And so maybe let's start there. I'd love to learn about kind of your experiences with that community, your experiences with the culture that made that community a high performing organization, and how that's kind of shaped your point of view in your career.
Yeah, 100%. So I did come from a military family. I was the one that broke kind of that segment off a little bit and went down the civilian route of it. But it really did instill in me that need to go out there and do something as a next step working for the DoD, especially my very first job. They were the ones that gave me that early start back in 2004 to give a chance working in IT to begin with. So started out doing that hands-on work. So started out just helping out with desktops and then all the way up to, okay, let's go actually build out some of these pieces. Let's go work on that security side of it. What are we trying to collect from targets? How do we bring that data back? To our earlier conversation earlier, it's everything was very manual back then. So you were very people oriented and the solution was throw people at the problem. So if you ran out of people, we would just pull more people in to come help out with it and keep charging forward to make sure that everything was manually taken down, manually documented, manually reviewed. You wrote it all down on a form. You had to take that form, convert it over to an Excel sheet, and then be able to take that Excel sheet and upload it into our central systems to be able to go out and really make sure that it had that point in time timestamp of when you did it, whose hands were on it. Every piece of that chain of custody was all manual there where I was there to it. And it took a long time to get that data to the hands of the people that can go to act on it. I'd say the big thing that I learned and what that really instilled from a early young age was that teaming mentality to solve a problem and really be able to work together. And I've used that throughout my whole career after it because I'm still in contact with those people that I worked with. I've attended retirement ceremonies for some of them as well too, because they left a mark on my life. They were the ones that also held me accountable to making sure that I lived up to my expectations of what I was to do and that they had my back and I had their back, regardless of what the situation was, so that we all came to the table. We all had the same focus. We all knew what we were doing. We all knew that there was that team camaraderie, that we would get together outside of the office place. And I really missed that team building. In all honesty, I haven't found another team that's been like that in my career. I've tried to build one, but I can't get back to that culture. But it's something that definitely shaped me to really go forward. And I'd love to hear kind of some of your experiences bookending it. Mine went from a lot of manual. I know you were able to automate a lot of that task. Kind of go through a little bit of some of that with me and kind of where I can fill in some of the gaps for you as well.
Yeah, well, the JSOC's like Bruno, you don't talk about it.
Yep.
But at the same time, there's actually some parallels to cyber. But I actually want to talk about another part, which is, for me as a founder, CEO, building and scaling Horizon 3, I spent a lot of time thinking about the characteristics of high performing teams and high performing organizations. And at JSOC, I mean, I viewed it as a PhD program in leadership. And I got to study alongside the greatest leaders the world will never hear about or know about. And as I think about what made JSOC such a high performing organization, I think about three characteristics. The first is they empowered those closest to the problem with resources and decision-making authority because they had the most context. They were the people in the positions to actually make the decision that was right because they knew what was going on. I think the second aspect of JSOC was a no compromise and shared understanding. There was no such thing as an information silo because if there was an information silo, the mission was at risk and somebody would die. It was a big deal, and that was inexcusable over information not being properly shared. And so there was a significant amount of shared understanding and a very intentional process and culture of sharing information to make sure everybody knew what was going on. And I think that's super important. And the third is about cadence and accountability. So everyone was accountable. Everyone was expected to be prepared. They were expected to know what was going on because of shared understanding. And there was a regular heartbeat or rhythm to operations from preparation to execution to post-op review or after action reviews that drove a culture of not blame, but a culture of accountability. And so those are three aspects I try to instill within Horizon 3, right? How do we empower those closest to the problem and lower the decision-making center of gravity in the organization? How do we make sure there are no information silos? As an example, I don't believe in functional OKRs. This is like a trendy thing with tech companies today, it seems, as for all companies. Marketing has their metrics and sales has their metrics, and as long as your metrics are great, you get your bonus. But who cares if your metrics are great if we fail the overall objective, right? And so at Horizon 3, my entire executive team has one set of metrics we are all measured against because it's one team, one mission, one outcome. And then finally, cadence and accountability and having those tough conversations when you have to. So I'd love to, what was your experience in looking at high performing teams, coming from a high performing organization that was so calm, and how has that um, influenced the way you think about building and scaling teams yourself?
Definitely. So I always look for that adaptability piece of it. I think that that's a big one. I want that open, honest feedback because the accountability piece is still very big to me as well. So when I came over and started up this SA organization that's at Optiv for the engineers, it was really looking for. I already had a great team from when it started off. There was a couple of people that were here well before I was. They had a chance to come in the door and really get things kicked off. So the first thing was just learning how to be the best leader for them. They were already a high performing team. I didn't want to disrupt that in any way, shape, or form. So I really came in looking for what can I do to help you progress to your next level of your career? Because that's to me a true tell of a leader is did they help their team move up to where they wanted to be at? Did we each hold each other accountable in our one-on-ones? Did we each go out to meet the regular goals of our team and what those were to be set forward? And I believe clear goal taking. I kept it very simple as well too. We all know that you have your numbers you need to go hit, but what can we do outside of that piece? What's that piece that's really going to give you an edge in the market, whether here at Optiv or somebody else, to really set yourself different? Because I think that's where you get to create your own personal brand and really be able to grow it. And have been able to see a lot of the team members move up into different roles within the company, and some have left to other areas and gotten out with partners as well too. And I've had that chance to kind of come in and pull in new members of the team. And I look for the same things. It's always, are you open with your communication? Are you willing to jump in and be a part of a team openly? Can you embrace the differences? Can you really jump in to really show that openness? And then are you willing to give 100% when we need 115%? I've never asked for over 100%. I'll give the extra 15%. That's what I believe as a leader is my job to go out and do, is really push that team to say, all right, we're rowing the boat. How much faster can we row it? How can we get there? How can we help our customers be better? That's where I really dive into the Optiv promise at too, because I believe everything my team sells, everything that we go through and sell, everything that we install, every service we offer, that's something that we're putting our team's brand on it. That's a mark that we have to make sure continues on and really grows forward.
No, that's awesome. It's a great segue into talent, you know, and especially veteran talent. So I talked about learn-it-alls that can solve any problem as a team under pressure, which is actually, I think, the right culture and mindset for an early startup team, right? You're learn-it-alls in those early days, especially, we were definitely learn-it-alls at in the early days of Horizon 3. But I also feel that there's a bit of a national tragedy in the sense that there are very few billion-dollar companies founded by special operations veterans compared to like the Israeli 8200 group, or at least that SOCOM, NSA, CIA type folks that have left the government from those positions. Very few billion-dollar companies in cybersecurity and elsewhere, even though those folks have solved and had to work on some of the hardest cyber and tech problems in the industry. And I think it's a national tragedy that we've failed to mobilize that veteran community, whether it's through SkillBridge or other techniques, in the way that the Israelis have. They've built an entire brand around 8200, and they talk about 8200 as a unicorn factory and so on and so forth. And so, kind of my longer quest, not really a side quest, but the longer quest that I hope I'm part of with Horizon 3 as one of the milestones there is letting those results do the talking. Like, we're well on our way to being a wildly successful unicorn level company. And a third of the people are former special operations NSA CIA types. And what I want to be able to prove is that damn, those people are really skilled. They're really good at what they do. Give them a shot and watch them just dominate their particular field because they are obsessed with mastering their craft. I mean, that's partially what makes them special as well. So I love your thoughts on talent, drawing talent from the veteran community, and how do we help transitioning veterans make the most of their post-military careers?
I think you guys have a great program from everything that I've seen from the outside looking in, and it's something that I aspire on this side to do too. And I believe it's not just the resume, right? Because what I look at is you have your bullet points on the resume, and every time I go look at something, and I have 3 veterans that are on my team of 9 today, and a couple were special forces community on the naval side. And I'll let them talk about themselves. I'm not going to bring them up on a call they're not aware of, but on that side of it, it's really being able to step in and give them a shot. I think that that's the biggest part, and that's something where I've seen lacked on in the past, and something where I like to lean in personally, and I've seen Optiv come through and back it as well too from our side. We have a whole veterans community that does just that. It's our Optiv vets, O vets. I have a challenge point in my desk. I'll give you one the next time I see you. But that's something that we go through and we really focus on because there's a lot of that discipline that comes from the military. Moving over to that special operations community where you're living in that day in, day out, you're good in high stress environments. That's what cybersecurity is every day. That's something that our customers live with. That's why I'm on call every day of the week in case one of the members of my team calls me and says, hey, this customer is getting breached. I need everybody on deck. Let's go. So those are day-to-day pieces that I still live with. And the people that I've seen really step it up are those veterans in our community that need to be given that shot. And that's why another reason why I'm happy to have the commercial team on our side is we're creating some of those new roles on our inside teams to create a brand new inside sales engineering team to say, hey, let's open this up. Let's go out there. Let's take our promises back to the community. Let's build them up. Let's really take that to the next level. And that's just outside of talent. What I've seen day to day, the people that I've worked with in the spec ops community are some of the best that I've ever worked with. And they're still friends of mine today. And that's something that I really enjoy seeing them move up and be able to move up along with them because I feel like I'm a small part of that community as well too.
Amazing. And it is definitely a community. It's a small community, but it's a very robust community. So let's maybe shift gears back to core cybersecurity. One of the things I was frustrated with, and I mentioned it earlier as a CIO, was deciding what not to fix. And I'd spent and watched millions of dollars get spent in people and tools and process and so on around risk-based vulnerability management. And it drove me nuts because essentially what I saw was a bunch of vendors selling math to make a crappy list less crappy. and because they didn't factor in exploitability or other things like that. And it just didn't feel it felt like a math exercise to get people off of your backs and give like plausible deniability and when you eventually got hacked that you did everything you could versus actually genuinely trying to reduce risk. And I think about risk-based vulnerability management as incorporating three or a few aspects of risk, but three or four in particular. The first one is your exploitable attack surface. Like, where are you exploitable? Let's just get that as ground truth and the first piece of information. The second thing is business impact. Don't just tell me, an attacker can become domain admin, because to the COO or to the CFO or to the executive leadership, they don't know what that means. What you want to be able to say is very precisely, an attacker can compromise credentials for people and accounts receivable. That also led to a business email compromise of those people and accounts receivable. As a result, an attacker can interdict payments by manipulating account information and emails that are going back and forth, which is a huge problem in, say, like the mortgage industry or in most financial workflows. It's emails for the final payment terms. Suddenly you're taking a bunch of technical findings, credential compromise, business email compromise, and so on, and a whole bunch of like technical details in between of how you got there, but tying it to business risk. So the second key part of RBVM is actual precise business risk. And I feel the third part of it is threat actor pressure. Are there known threat actor groups coming after you or coming after people like you? And if so, are any of their TTPs that have been identified aligned with some of the findings from your pen test results? And I feel that risk-based vulnerability management really needs to be thrown away in its current form and has to be rebuilt on these three pillars of information: exploitable attack surface, precise business impact, known threat actor pressure. What do you think about kind of those aspects to it? And then we can talk about the next level of details around meantime remediation, meantime to detection, but just those three kind of elements towards of asserting risk of a particular problem. How does that align with your experience?
I'd say from my experience, every company's definition of risk is a little bit different. Not only do you have the verticalization piece of it, but I've also seen that individual customer decide what they accept as risk. I've seen a lot really kind of pivot recently towards, hey, I don't mind if this area gets hit, but I really want to see this piece of it because this is where my business critical portion is. Like if that goes down, that kills a line of business that we can't live without. That's going to be the one that's the heartbreaker. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour. That's $1 million an hour. They've got that the dollar number tied to it already so that they know exactly what happens with it. I've seen that same change as well too from using those third-party vulnerability management softwares really come in and they check the box. They had a purpose at one point in time, but I've seen that become a lot of noise, especially from what I'm hearing from my customers. They don't want any more noise. They want to know what's broken. They want to know how to go fix the biggest bite they need to go take out of it. They want to go dive into that piece of it. And I think that's the big portion that I'm seeing, especially, I mean, the majority of my customers today are in that SMB space. So security is already an afterthought. So adding on a vulnerability scanner, they may not even get that approved unless it's a compliance framework because they're in an industry that it requires that for them to do business. And then they really don't have a way around it. I'd love to see that change as time goes on because I think that that's kind of becoming outdated a little bit to some point. And especially with the advents that we've seen and what we've talked about earlier today, those are pieces that they had a point and a purpose at one point in time, but that's something that has changed so dramatically that I feel it needs to be updated.
I think that as you, if you're a CIO, your ability or CISO, your ability to um, fix problems that matter. We talked about that earlier. But then, like, what is the next level of metrics that become important? And this is where I think there's a couple. The first is mean time to remediation. Like, how many exploitable problems do I have? Cool. More importantly, is how quickly am I fixing them? If I'm taking 3, 4, 5 days to fix a CISA KEV, a known exploitive vulnerability, I've lost, like game over. You need to be fixing kevs within, say, 8 hours of it becoming a kev. And how do you build that muscle memory? For a critical that's not a kev, you can maybe be in like, 72 hours or 48 hours, whatever that might be, depending on your industry. And if you're a high, maybe a little bit longer. But how quickly are you fixing problems is one really important metric. And then there's of course like derivatives of that, which is how often are problems reoccurring? Are you fixing a problem just to watch it show up again in a couple of weeks? Well, then you're just running in a hamster wheel. You're not actually making progress. The second kind of broader metric, I think, is mean time to detection. How quickly are you able to detect and respond once you've got a legit indicator in your environment? And if we literally had a 9-year-old kid use our product to hack a bank in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. And so if your response to an indicator of compromise is 4 minutes and 13 seconds, it's game over, doesn't matter. So the attackers are only getting faster. And how do you make sure your detection response is keeping up? Because you've got to be within their action loop. And if you can't, then you've got to focus on SOC effectiveness. What do you think?
I agree. And I think that's also where security and layers starts to become a solution for it as well, too, right? Just having one point in time piece of it. Like if I were to go out and let's say you and I started a new business tomorrow and we decide that the first thing we're going to install is a SIM because we want visibility, that immediately leaves us open, right? Like we didn't think of any kind of prevention aspect downstream on the infrastructure. And it also takes the back in that question of I chose visibility because I want to know I'm being breached. Now I have the time to detection, right? Like that's great. I know I'm being breached. But to your point on the response side of it, if I don't have the tools in place and they're properly set up to go out and respond to it, I didn't help myself when I put my budget in the wrong place. So I think that those two really kind of tie together with, and what I see in a bunch of small customers is okay, I have budget for this, and that's all I was approved for. Well, how do I stretch that budget for as long as I possibly can go and really get that piece out? I think that's where it kind of becomes an art of helping that customer determine where their pieces and parts are and what's really important to them and focusing on those pieces first. And then you start to build those base layers in where now you've got your visibility to the extent that's acceptable. I'm going to use acceptable as a broad term because everybody's definition of that's going to be a little bit different for their business. But now we have an acceptable level of visibility. The next piece to it is once I know what that is and how fast I am to detect that, now I know on those business critical apps, I have that level of expectation for it, whatever that may be set. You're going to work with business colleagues to figure out what that may be at. Or maybe you're in a highly regulated business where they dictate that for you and it's a little bit easier. Or you're mapping to NIST and you have that piece where it's broken out as well too. It usually takes a little bit to build up on from what I've seen, especially from the smaller customers. But once you have that visibility piece, you have the detection aspect. Now your next piece is what am I going to deploy out there to go out there and help me actually remediate it? Am I going to have a person? Am I going to throw people at the problem that are going to go out and remediate it? Am I going to adjust my infrastructure to be something more cloud-based and I'm treating it more like cattle versus pet? And I can rip and replace that whole entire stack. It's like, okay, I have a CISA Kev. I know I can patch that. It's going to be no downtime, right? Because I can just flip a switch and now I have the update out there without a customer noticing anything except for a couple millisecond blip. I've seen that come up as well too, of that transition away from the old I have a server farm inside my data center to now everything's running in AWS, GCP, Azure, pick your CSP. And we're able to take that and turn it around with Python scripting and be able to change that to be able to grow it out. Or I'm using VS Code to just push it as infrastructure as code to go out and now remediate my problem. If I'm stuck in that legacy architecture, my mean time to remediate may be the next patching cycle. So that may be a problem for me. And then I need to have a conversation about what can be modernized, what can be lifted and shifted. I think that's a question I'd love to catch up with you on and kind of dive into it because I think I went down a rabbit hole there a little bit. But I've seen a little bit of everything in my career at this point. To see that the next step in modernization and the automation piece of it, I think is where companies are trying to get to. And as they continue to grow, I think we'll see both of those numbers come down. And I think that the next level we'll see is coming back to those original forms of attack that you kind of mentioned earlier with business email compromise. Those are picking up again because we've seen serverless infrastructures throw some of that responsibility out there on the CSP, and now they're responsible for the patching. So it freed up my team. So it really allows us to get a little bit more granular and really kind of build that out.
No, that's awesome. There's so much to talk about. We've got about say 5 or 10 minutes left. Maybe open it up for questions for the audience. I did see a question come in that was around Gen AI and hacking Gen AI systems. I replied to that with a link to a tech talk Naveen did on hacking Gen AI, but we can spend some time on that. But maybe open it up. Are there questions out there, comments on what resonated with you in this fireside? So Brandon and I haven't chatted before, so it's a really good kind of fluid conversation. So I appreciate your time here. But yeah, let's open it up. And there's always a little awkward silence. So as you guys tee up your questions, let me talk about Gen AI. So Brandon, my, there's a lot of hype around hacking Gen AI systems, like exploiting LLMs and jailbreaking LLMs and so on. And I feel like there's the hype part of it. Well, there's a few aspects of hype. Part of the hype is founders trying to create a problem they can get funded to solve. The other part of it, though, is the reality of LLM adoption in the enterprise, which is still limited to some degree. So before we get into actually technical ways to hack LLMs and Gen AI systems, what's your take on the budget priority of pen testing an LLM from your point of view? Like, what are you seeing from Optiv and let's just start there. What are you seeing?
So from our side, what I've seen so far with the advent is really moving towards two different forms of how we're going to use it in the workplace. I've seen companies that will straight up block it. I've seen companies that will say, hey, we're going to implement a DLP policy around it. And they're really looking at tools or manual ways to mitigate what data can be shared into the LLM. I wouldn't say they're too worried about the LLM being hacked, but they're worried about their data being added to the database that anybody can go pull from. Question. So I think that's really where that big change is at for them is they don't want their data getting out, one. And two, I think the other piece to the companies that do go through and block it, what stops that person from opening it up on their phone and typing it in? At that point, you've lost your visibility aspect to it. And now we're in the Wild West again with the technology where we can't see what's going on with it. I've seen some pretty cool tools out there, to your point. I'm not going to dive into any of them. I don't know them well enough yet at this point, but I've seen some that look really kind of promising. And I've seen a lot of vendors really pop up from the network side of it, of just trying to control and dictate where that sensitive data is and who has access to it and where it can be moved to and from. That's the big ways that I'm seeing most of my customers deal with it today. And that seems to be a commonality. Would be interested in what you're seeing as well, too, from your side.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what we did even at Horizon 3. So back about 3 years ago when ChatGPT first came out, um, we had two very clear options. Either option one, block it, option two, embrace it. If we blocked it, it was just going to happen anyways. It's just a new form of shadow IT. And so if we embrace it by creating a path of least resistance. And what I mean by that is the people using GPT, whether it's at Horizon 3 or anywhere else, they're doing so because they want to quickly solve a problem. And so the more we can simplify that experience by, for instance, innovating or integrating it directly into Slack. So you don't have to go to another page. You can just, we called it Jarvis internally, at Jarvis, ask a question. Jarvis is going to go off and answer it. And then Jarvis is basically pointing to the precursor of Bedrock with foundational models that we had complete control over and full data privacy over. The second part was pre-training or providing context into Jarvis. So we took all of our product documentation, all of our marketing materials, and so on, and we basically loaded it up and got Jarvis to understand all of that information so that you had less hallucination risk or less kind of noise and nonsense risk if you interacted with Jarvis versus trying to tune a GPT session yourself to get it to actually give the answer you wanted. Then the third part was once we owned the control point, we were able to put in filters and lookups and so on to make sure that sensitive data didn't make it out. Even though we were tightly controlled in not losing control of our data within the pre-Bedrock environment, we still didn't want customer data, as an example, to end up out there. And so we had a variety of guards in place. So I think the early days of adopting whatever GPT you use, was around embracing with control points versus trying to bar it altogether, because water's going to find a path to its destination. It's just going to flow around those controls. And now you've got a shadow problem you have no visibility into. The second thing, and I'll ask this question to you, is for the few companies that have embraced LLMs as part of their product offerings. So there was a story of, I can't remember if it was Ford or GM or somebody basically built an LLM powered chatbot to for dealerships. And then somebody was able to jailbreak the chatbot and get them to buy a pickup truck for $1 or something like that. So now you've got the jailbreak risk. But my question is like, what's the actual risk there? So in the example of the pickup truck being bought for $1, there are already existing laws on the books around computer fraud and so on to prosecute that individual. You didn't need new laws. You don't need new regulations necessarily for that scenario. So what's your take on and then, if you can get an LLM to say inappropriate or racist things, yeah, it's kind of a reputational risk, but is that really a risk that elevates to being above the many other risks that a business is already accepting? So what's your take on the actual LLM jailbreaking problem set that people tend to talk about?
So I think from my perspective, it's that brand, that corporate brand awareness piece of it that I think is the biggest hit, right? That's where at least most of my customers and what I've seen in the industry, they're really focused on, they don't want to be that next brand that has a news article about them. So that's one less piece of it. I think that's where it becomes concerning is, let's say it's a small plumbing supply company that's based out of the Southeast, right? Let's say they're now able to go through, they have an LLM app that's chat that's coming through. Let's say it's saying something that the customer, it's just straight up racist and it's causing problems. No one's going to go back through them again. They're going to go look for a competitor. That could be complete loss of business in some of those cases because now their brand has been ruined. It's been smattered all over every place. Their 15 minutes of fame was in the wrong direction. And now they've got to go deal with that and potential lawsuits from it that they were not expecting. So I think finding a way to kind of come back and curb some of those pieces has been the biggest one. And that's why a lot of customers I've seen are afraid to go out and turn it on fully, or they're more open to letting their users go out and utilize something that's publicly available, like a Chat GPT or Google's version of it, right? To be able to let them go out and utilize their pieces so that that risk is off them. They're not worried about the brand awareness side of it. But I've also seen some people go or some customers go through and leverage it as an add-on to their customer service, and it's given them the wrong customer's data, right? So now you've got a DLP issue and you have a PII data issue as well too. Then now you've got to go figure out what happened, how that crossed, what do you have to go back and modify. Thankfully, those are all in tests and nothing was ever outside of it. But I've seen those happen far too often where it's a little silly mistake and the chatbot was doing what the chatbot thought it was supposed to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. The third part here is for the few companies actually training up their own LLM. So they're going beyond inference and they're actually trying to train. And in those companies, training data poisoning becomes really interesting, as well as IP theft of training data. Because at the end of the day, the models and weights don't matter. It's the training data that's the most important part of the stack. So, sensitive data exposure, IP theft of training data is sort of a deal. I mean, it's a DLP problem. What are you seeing there in terms of your customers or the market and their concerns of training data poisoning and training data theft?
So I've only had a couple of customers that are going through and building out their own LLMs today, and they have data scientists that are involved in it as well too. So they leaned in heavy to really go out and grow those pieces. And a lot of them in an early trial where they're really research focused educational spaces. So they're not worried about the data because it's already scientific research data. What they're worried about is somebody using the data to create something else. So being able to take that data and say, okay, it did this. Now I've gone through and poisoned the data because somebody uploaded something else they weren't supposed to into it. And they told it that that was true. And now you have a problem of getting a cross reference there from what I've seen on their sides and what they're doing early stages is really trying to focus it on specific points of research so that they're easy to detect if that piece happens. I think where they're going to run into their issue is as it gets larger and that data set's not as easy to go back and glean as fast anymore by a person. So my question is how they go back through and they analyze that data to make sure it still matches the original data sets that are in it and how they run some kind of a comparison to do that, which I don't think I have an answer to that side yet, and they're still researching it on their side as well too.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And maybe we'll end with at the end of the day, and we found this in Naveen's tech talk on hacking Gen AI emphasizes this. A lot of the or all the components used in the Gen AI value chain, whether it's inference or training or so on, are all standard pieces of software with standard problems in them. Broken authentication problems or cross-site scripting problems or misconfigurations that lead to privilege escalation and so on and so forth. And so there's nothing like special or magical about the underlying tools that make them inherently secure. In fact, they're quite insecure because of how quickly they're being built and published, a lot of it in open source without the right security checks that are in place. MCP servers are probably the best example. They are almost every MCP example that I've looked at or that the team has looked at is riddled with the most basic vulnerabilities and problems. I think it was the AWS Postgres reference implementation or MCP Postgres implementation. If you were really nice and kind, I think it was AWS. I can't remember exactly which one. If you were really nice to it, by default, it's read only to your Postgres server. But if you're really nice and sweet, it'll give you write access. And like, that's a problem. If you assume the MCP server only had read access and now the attacker, by saying, I'm your friend, you should really be nice to me, you're going to hurt my feelings. Okay, here's your write access. Go. And none of that's really monitored or instrumented either. So I think it is the rapid adoption of Gen AI tools that pose the biggest risk because those tools are hastily written, inherently insecure, and given significant access in the environment for the sake of speed and capturing an opportunity.
I agree too. And to that point that we talked about earlier as well too, about the infrastructure pieces, and they're running on the same things in the back end, right? So a lot of it could be running on an Ubuntu server, it could be running on a RHEL server, right? It depends on the security access you get behind the scenes too. It's still running on infrastructure, whether it be as code or you built a server up to run it in-house and test it within your production site. If somebody gets access to that server because you didn't patch it because you were afraid of breaking that new database, that new LLM, guess what? They just stole your tool.
Exactly right. Excellent. Well, listen, let's call it here. We'll give about 2 minutes back to the audience. Thank you so much. And Courtney, you've got the last word.
Oh, I just appreciate you and Brandon. What great candor, thought leadership. Just appreciate that you guys participated in the fireside chat and looking forward to more continued success with Optiv and Horizon 3. You guys have a great afternoon.